Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Marlowe sat on her kitchen floor with the phone still pressed against her ear, even though the line had gone silent. Her daughter's voice kept echoing in her head. Mom, please don't come to graduation. 22 years of sacrifice, 22 years of double shifts at the hospital, 22 years of choosing her daughter over everything else. And now this. The tile beneath her was cold, but she couldn't move. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, watching Thessaly walk across that stage in her cap and gown, holding her diploma high. Marlowe had already bought the dress. Navy blue with gold buttons. She'd saved for 6 months just to afford it. The invitation sat on her refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a graduation cap. She stared at it now through tears that wouldn't stop falling. The morning had started like any other Wednesday. Marlowe woke up at 5, made her coffee, and checked her phone for messages from Thessaly. There was nothing. That wasn't unusual. College had made her daughter busy, independent, distant in ways that hurt but made sense. Marlowe understood. She remembered her own mother's tight grip, the way it felt like drowning sometimes. So she gave Thessaly space. She sent cheerful texts that often went unanswered. She mailed care packages filled with snacks and handwritten notes. She loved from a distance because that's what her daughter seemed to need. But this phone call had shattered that careful balance. Thessaly's voice had been shaking. Mom, I need you to understand. This isn't about you. But how could it not be about her? Marlowe had raised Thessaly alone since she was 3 years old. Her ex-husband, Camden, had walked out one Tuesday morning and never looked back. No child support, no birthday cards, no explanations that made sense. Marlowe had worked herself to exhaustion to give Thessaly everything she needed. She'd missed her own mother's funeral because she couldn't afford to take time off work. She worn shoes with holes in them for 2 years so Thessaly could have new ones for school. Every decision, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, it had all been for this moment. The graduation, the proof that it was all worth it. And now her daughter was asking her not to come? Thessaly had tried to explain, but Marlowe couldn't hear past the roaring in her ears. Something about complicated and not ready, and I'll explain everything later. Later, as if later could heal the wound that was opening up in Marlowe's chest right now. She'd asked the only question that mattered. Did I do something wrong? The silence on the other end had lasted too long. When Thessaly finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost broken. No, Mom. You did everything right. That's why this is so hard. Then she'd said she had to go, that she'd call back soon, that she loved her. But Marlowe barely heard those last words. The phone had slipped from her hand and she'd slid down the cabinet to the floor. Now she sat there as the sun moved across the kitchen, painting shadows on the walls. Her shift at the hospital started in 3 hours, but she couldn't imagine standing up, getting dressed, pretending everything was fine. Her supervisor, Dinah, would understand if she called in. But what would she say? My daughter doesn't want me at her graduation? The shame of it felt too heavy to speak out loud. Marlowe reached for her phone, scrolling through old photos of Thessaly. Birthday parties, school plays, the day they'd moved her into her dorm room 2 years ago. In every picture, Thessaly was smiling. In every memory, they'd been close. Or at least Marlowe had thought so. What had she missed? What had changed? And why was her daughter pushing her away at the exact moment when Marlowe needed to hold her close? Marlowe had never planned to be a single mother. She'd married Camden when she was 23, full of dreams about the life they'd build together. He was charming, the kind of man who could make you believe anything was possible. They met at a community cookout in Atlanta, and within 6 months, they were married in a small ceremony at her mother's church. Thessaly came a year later, a beautiful baby girl with her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined chin. For 3 years, Marlowe convinced herself they were happy. She ignored the late nights Camden spent working. She pretended not to smell perfume on his shirts. She kept the peace because that's what her own mother had taught her to do. The day Camden left, Marlowe was folding laundry in their tiny apartment in the old Fourth Ward. Thessaly was playing with blocks on the living room floor, building towers and knocking them down with delighted laughter. Camden walked in, grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, and started throwing clothes into it. Marlowe asked what he was doing, her hand still holding one of his t-shirts. He didn't even look at her when he answered, "I can't do this anymore." Those were the only words he gave her. No apology, no explanation, no promises to stay in touch with his daughter. He walked out the door while Thessaly was still laughing, still building towers, still too young to understand that her world had just broken in half. Marlowe's mother, Opal, had driven over that same night after Marlowe called her, sobbing. Opal was a strong woman, the kind who'd raised 5 children on her own after Marlowe's father died of cancer. She sat at that scratched kitchen table and held Marlowe's hands in hers. "You're going to survive this," she said. "Not because it's fair, not because it's easy, but because that little girl in there needs you to." Opal had stayed for 2 weeks, helping Marlowe figure out how to navigate single motherhood, how to apply for assistance, how to find affordable childcare, how to keep breathing when the weight of it all felt like drowning. By the time Opal left, Marlowe had a plan. She'd go to nursing school. She'd build a career that could support them both. She'd prove to Thessaly that a woman didn't need a man to survive. Nursing school had been brutal. Marlowe studied while Thessaly slept, survived on 3 hours of rest, and worked weekends at a gas station to cover rent. There were nights when she cried in the bathroom, wondering if she'd made a mistake, wondering if she was strong enough. But every time she looked at Thessaly, growing taller, asking questions, drawing pictures to tape on the refrigerator, Marlowe found the strength to keep going. She graduated top of her class, got hired at Grady Memorial Hospital, started climbing the ladder from floor nurse to charge nurse to supervisor. She never dated, never let another man into their lives. It was just her and Thessaly against the world, and that had always felt like enough. Thessaly had been such a bright child. Teachers constantly praised her intelligence, her curiosity, her kindness. She'd made honor roll every semester, played violin in the school orchestra, volunteered at the food bank on weekends. Marlowe had been so proud she thought her chest might burst open. When Thessaly got accepted to Spelman College with a partial scholarship, Marlowe had cried for an hour. They'd worked together to fill out financial aid forms, apply for grants, figure out how to cover the remaining costs. Marlowe had taken on extra shifts, sold her car and took the bus instead, cut every expense she could find. Nothing mattered more than giving Thessaly the education she deserved, the future she'd earned. And for 2 years, everything had seemed perfect. Thessaly called home regularly, sent pictures from campus, talked about her classes and her friends. Until today. Until that phone call. Until, "Please don't come to graduation." Marlowe didn't go to work that day. She called Dinah and said she had a family emergency, which was true even if she couldn't explain it. She spent hours sitting in Thessaly's old bedroom, touching the posters still on the walls, the trophies lined up on the shelf, the stuffed animals arranged on the bed exactly as her daughter had left them. This room had been Marlowe's shrine to motherhood. Every object here represented a memory, a milestone, a moment of pride. Now it all felt like evidence of something she'd misunderstood. Had she been holding on too tight? Had her love become suffocating without her realizing it? She tried to replay every conversation from the past few months, searching for clues she'd missed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thessaly. "Mom, I'm sorry about earlier. Can we talk tomorrow? I promise I'll explain everything. Please don't be mad." Marlowe stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm not mad. I'm confused and hurt, but I'll wait for you to explain." She added a heart emoji at the end because she didn't want Thessaly to feel guilty, even though guilt was eating Marlowe alive. What kind of mother raised a daughter who didn't want her at graduation? What had she done wrong? The questions spiraled through her mind like a storm she couldn't escape. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Even God felt distant today. That night, Marlowe's best friend Yvette came over with Chinese food and wine. They'd been friends since nursing school, bonded by late-night study sessions and shared exhaustion. Yvette knew everything about Marlowe's life. The divorce, the struggles, the sacrifices. She also knew how much this graduation meant. When Marlowe opened the door, Yvette took one look at her face and pulled her into a hug that lasted several minutes. They ate lo mein straight from the containers while Marlowe explained what had happened. Yvette listened without interrupting, her face moving through expressions of shock, confusion, and finally anger. "That doesn't make any sense," she said. "Thessaly loves you. Everyone can see it." But love and wanting someone at your graduation weren't the same thing, apparently. Marlowe had learned that today. Yvette tried to offer explanations. Maybe Thessaly was embarrassed about something, or maybe there was a surprise involved, or maybe she was going through something personal she wasn't ready to share. Each theory felt equally impossible. Marlowe knew her daughter, or at least she thought she did. They'd always been honest with each other, always talked through problems together. This sudden wall between them felt like a betrayal, even though Marlowe hated thinking of it that way. She didn't want to be the kind of mother who made everything about herself. But how could she not take this personally when it cut so deep? Yvette stayed until midnight, leaving only when Marlowe promised she'd try to sleep. But sleep didn't come. Marlowe lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across the plaster, listening to the sounds of her neighborhood settling into night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life continued like nothing had changed, but Marlowe's world had tilted on its axis. She thought about calling her sister Katira in Houston, but what would she say? Katira had her own children, her own problems. She didn't need to carry Marlowe's confusion too. So Marlowe stayed silent, trapped in a pain she couldn't name, waiting for tomorrow when Thessaly had promised to explain, waiting and hoping the explanation would make sense of this unbearable hurt. Thessaly sat in her dorm room with her roommate, Bellamy, trying to explain why she just told her mother not to come to graduation. The words felt wrong in her mouth, tangled and insufficient. Bellamy sat cross-legged on her bed, listening with the kind of patience that had made them best friends over the past 2 years. "So, what did you actually tell her?" Bellamy asked. Thessaly pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself not to cry again. "I told her not to come. I told her it was complicated. I told her I'd explain later." She dropped her hands and looked at Bellamy. "I didn't tell her the truth because I'm a coward." The truth was sitting in a folder on Thessaly's desk. Medical bills, appointment records, diagnosis papers that had changed everything 3 months ago. Stage 2 breast cancer, the same disease that had killed her grandmother Opal 5 years earlier. Thessaly had found the lump herself during spring break, felt the fear rise in her throat, made the appointment at the student health center without telling anyone. She'd convinced herself it was nothing, just a cyst or swollen tissue or something harmless that would disappear. But the biopsy results had come back with words that felt like a death sentence. Malignant, aggressive, treatment needed immediately. And suddenly, her entire life had narrowed to a single terrifying focus. She'd started chemotherapy 6 weeks ago at a clinic near campus, scheduling treatments between classes, hiding the exhaustion behind smiles and makeup. Her professors knew. The student health office knew. Bellamy knew because she'd been there the day Thessaly got the news. But Marlowe didn't know because Thessaly couldn't bear to tell her. How could she? Her mother had already given up everything for her, had already sacrificed her entire adult life to make sure Thessaly had opportunities. How could Thessaly look her in the eye and say, "I might die"? How could she add that burden to a woman who'd already carried so much? So she kept it a secret, hidden it like shame, buried it beneath determination to finish the semester strong. The graduation ceremony was in 2 weeks. By then, Thessaly would be in the middle of her treatment cycle. Her hair had already started falling out in clumps, which is why she cut it short and bought 3 different headscarves that she rotated through. She lost 15 pounds, despite forcing herself to eat. Her skin had taken on a grayish tint that no amount of concealer could hide. There was no way to hide this from her mother in Gerson. Marlowe would take one look at her and know something was desperately wrong. And then Thessaly would have to explain, and her mother would blame herself somehow. And the day that was supposed to celebrate achievement would become about sickness and fear and all the things Thessaly was trying so hard to control. So she made the decision to keep her mother away, to protect her from this reality for just a little longer, to let graduation happen without Marlowe seeing how sick her daughter had become. She told herself it was an act of love, but it felt cruelty. She could hear the hurt in her mother's voice during that phone call, could imagine her sitting in her kitchen trying to understand what she'd done wrong. The guilt was crushing, but the alternative, watching her mother's face crumble when she saw the truth, felt even worse. Bellamy had argued against this plan, had said Marlowe deserved to know that keeping secrets would only make everything harder. But Thessaly was stubborn, just like her mother. She'd made up her mind. She'd get through graduation, finish this round of treatment, and then she'd tell Marlowe everything. Then they face it together. But not yet. Not now. Not when her mother had already given so much. Morning came too early for Marlowe. She'd finally fallen asleep around 3 and woke at 6 to her alarm, feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind was racing. Today, Thessaly had promised to call and explain. Marlowe had no idea what time that would be, so she carried her phone everywhere, to the bathroom, to the kitchen, back to the bedroom, afraid to miss it. She made coffee but couldn't drink it, made toast but left it untouched on the counter. Her stomach was too twisted with anxiety to accept food. She called work and took another sick day, ignoring Dinah's concerned questions about whether everything was okay. By noon, Thessaly still hadn't called. Marlowe tried to distract herself by cleaning the apartment, scrubbing the kitchen until it gleamed, organizing closets that didn't need organizing, folding and refolding laundry. Physical work usually helped calm her mind, but today, it only made her more agitated. Every few minutes, she checked her phone. No missed calls, no new texts. The silence felt deliberate, like Thessaly was avoiding her. Marlowe told herself to be patient, that her daughter was probably in class or busy with final exams. But the waiting was torture. She felt like a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if she'd fall or be pulled back to safety. Around 2 o'clock, her sister Keturah called from Houston. They hadn't spoken in almost a month, both busy with their own lives. Keturah worked as a paralegal and had 3 teenage boys who kept her constantly running. But somehow she knew something was wrong. Sisters had that sense sometimes. "What's going on with you?" Keturah asked after they'd exchanged basic pleasantries. Marlowe hesitated, then told her everything about the phone call, about Thessaly asking her not to come to graduation, about the waiting and the confusion and the hurt that wouldn't stop growing. Keturah listened quietly, then said something that made Marlowe's chest tighten. "That doesn't sound like Thessaly at all. Something else is going on." That thought had been lurking in the back of Marlowe's mind since yesterday, but she'd been too hurt to examine it properly. Now Keturah was saying it out loud, giving voice to the fear Marlowe hadn't wanted to name. What if this wasn't about her at all? What if Thessaly was in some kind of trouble? What if she needed help but was too scared or ashamed to ask for it? Marlowe's mind immediately went to dark places: abusive boyfriend, financial problems, academic trouble, depression. Each possibility felt worse than the last. "You need to go down there," Keturah said firmly. "You need to look your daughter in the face and find out what's really happening." Marlowe wanted to argue, to say that would be disrespecting Thessaly's wishes, but Keturah cut her off. Sometimes love means pushing past boundaries. Sometimes it means showing up even when you're told not to. After they hung up, Marlowe sat with that advice for a long time. Part of her knew Keturah was right. Another part was terrified of making things worse, of pushing Thessaly further away. She checked her phone again, still nothing. The afternoon light was starting to fade, painting her living room in shades of gold and amber. She thought about her mother, about Opal's strength and wisdom. What would Opal do in this situation? The answer came clearly. Opal would go. She wouldn't wait for permission or explanation. She would get in her car and drive to Atlanta and knock on that dorm room door until her granddaughter answered. Opal had never been afraid of hard conversations or uncomfortable truths. She believed that love required courage, not comfort. And maybe Marlowe needed to follow that example now, even if it scared her half to death. By evening, Marlowe had made up her mind. She'd drive to Atlanta tomorrow morning, unannounced, and talk to Thessaly face to face. The decision brought equal parts relief and terror. What if Thessaly was angry? What if this made everything worse? But Marlowe couldn't keep living in this suspended state of not knowing. She needed answers, even if they were painful. She needed to look at her daughter and understand what had changed. So she packed an overnight bag, set her alarm for 5 a.m, and tried to prepare herself emotionally for whatever was coming. Sleep was impossible again. Her mind kept spinning through scenarios, imagining conversations, rehearsing what she'd say. At 4:30, she gave up on sleep and got in the shower. The hot water helped ease some of the tension in her shoulders, but her stomach remained a knot of nerves. She dressed carefully, choosing comfortable clothes for the 2-hour drive, jeans and a soft sweater, her favorite leather jacket that had belonged to Opal. She wanted to feel close to her mother today, to draw on whatever strength Opal could send from beyond. As she made coffee, her phone buzzed with a text from Thessaly. "Good morning, Mom. Sorry I didn't call yesterday. Finals are crazy. Can we talk this weekend instead?" Marlowe stared at the message, anger rising in her chest. This weekend, after everything? No, she wasn't waiting anymore. She didn't respond to the text. Instead, she grabbed her keys, her bag, and her phone and headed out to her car. The drive to Atlanta was usually peaceful, a stretch of highway through Georgia pine forest that Marlowe had always found calming. But today, every mile felt heavy with anticipation. She tried to practice what she'd say. "I'm worried about you. I need you to be honest with me. Whatever's wrong, we'll fix it together." The words sounded hollow in her own ears, rehearsed and artificial. How did you prepare for a conversation like this? How did you brace yourself for truths you couldn't yet imagine? She turned on the radio to distract herself, but every song felt too cheerful or too sad. Finally, she drove in silence, alone with her thoughts and her fear. She arrived at the Spelman campus just after 8. The morning was beautiful, the kind of spring day that made Atlanta feel alive with possibility. Students walked between buildings carrying backpacks and coffee cups, their faces bright with youth and energy. Marlowe remembered dropping Thessaly off here 2 years ago, remembered the pride she felt watching her daughter join this community of brilliant young women. She found parking near Thessaly's dorm, a brick building covered in ivy with wide steps leading to the entrance. Her hands were shaking as she turned off the ignition. This was it. No more waiting, no more wondering. She'd see her daughter in minutes and finally understand what was happening. Inside the building, Marlowe climbed the stairs to the third floor, her heart pounding with each step. She reached room 314 and stood there for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she knocked, 3 firm raps that echoed in the hallway. She heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. The door opened, but it wasn't Thessaly standing there. It was a young woman Marlowe recognized from photos, Bellamy, Thessaly's roommate. Bellamy's eyes went wide with recognition and something that looked like panic. "Mrs. Walker, Thessaly's not here right now. She's at an appointment." The way she said appointment made Marlowe's stomach drop. That wasn't the voice of someone talking about a casual meeting. That was the voice of someone hiding something serious.
Marlowe stepped into the dorm room without asking permission. Something in Bellamy's face had triggered every maternal instinct she possessed. "What kind of appointment?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Bellamy hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for an escape route. "I really think you should talk to Thessaly about this," she said carefully. But Marlowe wasn't leaving without answers. She'd driven 2 hours. She'd spent 2 days drowning in confusion and hurt. She deserved to know what was happening to her daughter. "Tell me," she said. And it wasn't a request. It was a mother demanding the truth. Bellamy's shoulders slumped in defeat. "She's at the cancer center for treatment." The world tilted sideways. Marlowe grabbed the edge of Thessaly's desk to steady herself, her knees threatening to give out. Cancer. The word exploded in her head like a bomb, destroying everything else. Cancer. Like Opal. Like her mother who'd suffered and died despite every prayer and every treatment. Cancer. Her baby girl. Her brilliant, beautiful daughter. "What kind?" Marlowe heard herself ask, her voice sounding distant and strange. "Breast cancer," Bellamy said softly, tears now streaming down her face. "She found it 3 months ago. She's been doing chemo here at the clinic. She didn't want to tell you because she didn't want you to worry or blame yourself or stop her from finishing school. She was going to tell you after graduation." 3 months. Thessaly had been fighting cancer alone for 3 months while Marlowe sent cheerful text messages and planned graduation celebrations. While Marlowe worked her shifts and complained about minor problems and lived in blissful ignorance of her daughter's suffering. The guilt crashed over her like a physical wave, so powerful she thought she might vomit. She'd been hurt about not being invited to graduation while her daughter was facing death. She'd made it about herself, about her feelings, about her wounded pride. Meanwhile, Thessaly had been trying to protect her, trying to spare her this pain for just a little longer. Marlowe sank into Thessaly's desk chair, her legs no longer able to hold her weight. "Where is the cancer center? I need the address right now." Bellamy grabbed a piece of paper and wrote it down with shaking hands. Her appointment started at 7:30. It usually takes about 3 hours for the infusion, so she should be done around 11. "Mrs. Walker, please don't be angry with her. She was just trying to—" But Marlowe was already moving, already grabbing the paper, already heading for the door. She wasn't angry. She was terrified. She was heartbroken. She was desperate to get to her daughter and hold her and promise her that everything would be okay, even though she had no idea if that was true. The drive to the cancer center was a blur. Marlowe barely remembered getting back in her car, barely registered the streets she drove through, barely noticed the other cars on the road. All she could think about was Thessaly sitting in some sterile room with poison dripping into her veins, facing this nightmare alone. She found the clinic in a medical building near the university. The lobby was quiet and painfully clean, with abstract art on the walls and soft music playing from hidden speakers. Marlowe approached the reception desk where a woman with kind eyes looked up at her. "I'm looking for my daughter, Thessaly Walker," Marlowe said, her voice breaking on her daughter's name. The receptionist checked her computer. "She's in treatment room 4, down that hallway, third door on the right. But visiting hours..." Marlowe was already walking, already pushing through the door into the treatment area. She didn't care about visiting hours or protocols or anything except finding Thessaly. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear. Marlowe counted the doors. 1, 2, 3. She pushed open the door to treatment room 4 and stopped breathing. Thessaly was sitting in a recliner by the window, an IV line running into her arm, her head covered with a purple headscarf. She looked so small in that chair, so fragile, so different from the vibrant girl who'd left home 2 years ago. Her eyes were closed and she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. Exhausted in a way that spoke of cells dying and bodies fighting wars they weren't meant to fight. Marlowe's vision blurred with tears. This was her baby, her daughter, the little girl who used to bring her dandelions from the yard and call them flowers, the teenager who'd studied by flashlight under her covers because she loved learning so much, the young woman who'd been too kind to burden her mother with this terrible truth. Marlowe sank into Thessaly's desk chair, her legs no longer able to hold her weight. Thessaly's eyes flew open at her mother's touch. For a second, confusion crossed her face, then recognition, then horror. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thin and strained. "What are you doing here?" But before Marlowe could answer, Thessaly's face crumbled and she started to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Marlowe climbed into the recliner with her, careful of the IV line, and wrapped her arms around her daughter the way she used to when Thessaly was small and scared. "I'm here," she said into Thessaly's headscarf. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving. I'm not ever leaving." Thessaly clung to her, her thin arms surprisingly strong, her body trembling with the force of her crying. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter intertwined in that uncomfortable chair, holding each other through pain that had no words. Eventually, Thessaly's sobs quieted into hiccups, then into shaky breaths. Marlowe pulled back just enough to see her daughter's face. Up close, she could see all the signs she'd somehow missed in their video calls. The weight loss, the gray tinge to his skin, the exhaustion etched into every feature. How had she not noticed? How had she been so blind? "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I should have told you, but I just couldn't. I couldn't put this on you. You've already given up so much for me." Marlowe's heart broke all over again at those words. She cupped her daughter's face in her hands, forcing her daughter to look at her. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "There is nothing in this world that you could face that I wouldn't want to face with you. Nothing. Do you understand me? I am your mother. That doesn't mean I only get the good parts. It means I'm there for all of it. The joy and the pain and the fear and the fight. All of it." Fresh tears streamed down Thessaly's face, but she nodded. "I was so scared. I'm still so scared. What if the treatment doesn't work? What if I'm dying and I've wasted my whole senior year hiding it from you?" Those words cut through Marlowe like knives. The thought of Thessaly being scared and alone while dealing with this was unbearable. But Marlowe pushed her own fear down, forced herself to be strong in the way her daughter needed right now. "You're not dying," she said with absolute conviction. "You're fighting. And you're not fighting alone anymore. From this moment on, I'm here. I'm taking leave from work. I'm staying with you through every treatment, every appointment, every hard day. We're going to beat this together." She said it with such certainty that even she almost believed it. The truth was she had no idea what would happen,
But faith wasn't about knowing, it was about choosing hope even when hope seemed impossible. A nurse came in to check Thessaly's vitals and the IV drip. She smiled at Marlowe with understanding in her eyes. "You must be Mom," she said. "Thessaly talks about you all the time." Marlowe looked at her daughter, surprised. Thessaly gave her a watery smile. "I do. You're like my hero, Mom. That's why I couldn't tell you. How do you tell your hero you might not be strong enough to win?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marlowe thought carefully before answering. "Strength isn't about winning alone," she finally said. "Strength is knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to let people love you through the hard parts. You are the strongest person I know. Not because you kept this secret, but because you're sitting here fighting for your life while still worrying about graduation and finals and my feelings." The nurse finished her checks and left them alone again. Through the window, Marlowe could see the Atlanta skyline in the distance, buildings reaching toward a blue sky. Somewhere in this city, students were studying for exams, professors were teaching classes, life was continuing in its normal patterns. But in this room, everything had changed. Marlowe's priorities had instantly reorganized themselves. Graduation didn't matter. Her job didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this girl, this moment, this fight they were now facing together. "Tell me everything," Marlowe said, "from the beginning. I want to know all of it." And so Thessaly talked about finding the lump, about the biopsy, about the diagnosis and the treatment plan and the side effects and the fear that woke her up at 3 a.m. Marlowe listened to every word, holding her daughter's hand, and began to understand the depth of courage it had taken for Thessaly to face this alone. After Thessaly's treatment finished, Marlowe drove her back to the dorm, both of them silent with exhaustion. The emotional weight of the morning had drained them completely. Back in the dorm room, Bellamy had clearly been crying. She hugged Marlowe like they were family, thanking her for coming, apologizing for keeping the secret. Marlowe reassured her that she understood, that she was grateful Thessaly had someone supporting her through this. Then she sat down with both girls and started making practical plans. That's what Marlowe did. She organized, she solved problems, she created structure and chaos. It's what had kept her alive through single motherhood, and it would keep them alive through this too. First priority was housing. Marlowe couldn't stay in the dorm, but she needed to be close. She pulled up apartment rental websites on her phone and started searching for month-to-month furnished places near campus. Something small but comfortable. Somewhere she could be Thessaly's home base during treatment. Thessaly tried to protest, saying Marlowe couldn't leave her job, couldn't uproot her life like this. But Marlowe shut that down immediately. "I have 3 weeks of paid leave and another 4 weeks of unpaid leave saved up. And even if I didn't, I'd take it anyway. This is not up for discussion." The firmness in her voice left no room for argument. Thessaly finally nodded, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. Second priority was medical information. Marlowe needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. What stage was the cancer? What was the treatment protocol? What were the survival rates? What were the side effects to watch out for? She made a list of questions to ask at the next oncologist appointment, which was scheduled for Friday. Thessaly explained that her doctor, Dr. Petronella Okoye, was one of the best in Atlanta, specializing in young adult cancers. She'd been kind and patient with Thessaly, answering every question, never minimizing her fears. Marlowe felt grateful to this doctor she hadn't met yet, grateful that her daughter had received good care even without her there. Third priority was Thessaly's education. Finals were in 2 weeks, and graduation was the week after that. Thessaly had been trying to maintain her grades while undergoing chemotherapy, a feat that seemed almost impossible to Marlowe. "We'll talk to your professors," Marlowe said. "Explain what's happening. Get extensions where you need them. Your health comes first. If you need to take incompletes and finish coursework this summer, that's fine.
If you need to delay graduation, that's fine too. But Thessaly shook her head stubbornly. No, I'm walking across that stage in 3 weeks. I didn't fight this hard to miss that moment. Marlowe saw the determination in her daughter's eyes and recognized it instantly. It was the same determination that had gotten Marlowe through nursing school, the same stubbornness that ran through their family like a river. By evening, Marlowe had found a furnished studio apartment 2 blocks from campus, contacted her supervisor about emergency leave, and created a detailed schedule for the next 3 weeks. Treatments, doctor appointments, meal planning, rest periods, everything organized and written down. Structure helped. Lists helped. Having a plan helped push back against the helplessness that threatened to overwhelm them both. As darkness fell over Atlanta, Marlowe ordered pizza for dinner, and the three of them, Marlowe, Thessaly, and Bellamy, sat on the dorm room floor eating and talking. Not about cancer or fear or death, just about regular things. Classes and professors and campus gossip. For an hour, they pretended to be normal. And that pretending felt like medicine too. Like hope in cardboard boxes. Like life insisting on continuing despite everything, trying to stop it.
The next few weeks passed in a blur of appointments and treatments. Marlowe moved into the small apartment and transformed it into a healing space. She bought soft blankets and good pillows. She stocked the kitchen with foods that might help combat nausea: ginger tea, bland crackers, fresh fruit. She created a comfortable nest where Thessaly could rest between her dorm life and treatment days. Dr. Okoye turned out to be exactly what Thessaly had described: brilliant, compassionate, and honest. She sat with Marlowe for 2 hours, explaining everything in detail. The cancer was aggressive, but caught relatively early. The treatment protocol was intensive: 6 rounds of chemotherapy followed by potential surgery and radiation. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic if Thessaly responded well to treatment. Marlowe became an expert in side effects and warning signs. She learned which medications helped with nausea and which made Thessaly too drowsy. She discovered that ice chips helped when everything else made her daughter sick. She figured out that watching comedy shows distracted Thessaly from pain better than dramatic movies. She held Thessaly's hand during the bad nights when fear took over and made sleep impossible. She cleaned up vomit without flinching. She helped Thessaly shower on days when standing felt impossible. She became what she'd always been: a mother, doing whatever was necessary to care for her child. And in those moments of intimate caregiving, something shifted between them. The adult relationship they'd been building gave way to something deeper, something that transcended roles or expectations. Thessaly's professors were understanding about her situation. Most granted extensions on final papers and allowed her to take exams on modified schedules. The dean's office worked with them to ensure Thessaly could still graduate on time if she completed all requirements by the deadline. Bellamy helped by taking detailed notes in classes Thessaly couldn't attend, turning their dorm room into a study space where they go over material together. The whole Spelman community seemed to rally around Thessaly once word got out. Friends brought food, professors sent encouraging emails. The student health services connected them with cancer support groups and counseling resources. It reminded Marlowe that despite everything happening in the world, there was still incredible kindness in it too. The hardest days were when Thessaly felt too sick to do anything but lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, fighting waves of nausea and pain. On those days, Marlowe would read to her. Sometimes textbooks for classes, sometimes poetry, sometimes just random articles from the internet about topics that interested them both. The sound of her mother's voice seemed to soothe something in Thessaly that medication couldn't reach. They talked about Opal during these quiet hours, remembering the grandmother who'd fought the same disease and lost. But they also talked about all the advances in treatment since then, all the reasons why Thessaly's fight might end differently. They chose hope deliberately, consciously, as an act of defiance against despair. By the third week, Thessaly had completed all her coursework. She turned in every paper, taken every exam, fulfilled every requirement for graduation. It had cost her everything: sleep, energy, countless hours fighting through brain fog and exhaustion, but she'd done it. When she submitted her final assignment, she cried with relief. Marlowe held her, proud beyond words. This was strength, not the performance of it, but the real, messy, determined version that kept showing up even when everything hurt. The version that said, I will finish what I started and meant it. The version that refused to let cancer steal this milestone. Graduation was in 4 days. Thessaly was going to walk across that stage, and Marlowe was going to be there watching, her heart full of more pride than one chest could possibly hold. 3 days before graduation, Thessaly and Marlowe sat in the apartment eating lunch. Soup that Marlowe had made from scratch, one of the few things Thessaly's stomach would accept. The atmosphere between them had changed completely since that moment in the treatment room. They were closer now, bonded by battle, connected in ways that went beyond mother and daughter. There were soldiers fighting the same war, and that created an intimacy that nothing else could replicate. As they ate, Thessaly brought up the conversation that had started everything. She said, I need to explain about why I told you not to come to graduation. I need you to understand what I was thinking. Marlowe set down her spoon and gave Thessaly her full attention. I thought I was protecting you, Thessaly continued. I thought if you came and saw how sick I looked, it would ruin the whole day. You'd worked so hard for this moment, sacrificed so much to get me to college. I wanted you to at least have one day where you could just be proud without also being heartbroken. I thought I was being selfish, but Bellamy told me I was wrong. She said I was actually being selfish because I was making a choice about your feelings without giving you a chance to choose for yourself. Thessaly's eyes filled with tears. She was right, Mom. I'm sorry. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. Marlowe reached across the small table and took her daughter's hand. I understand why you did it, she said. You were trying to protect me the same way I spent your whole childhood trying to protect you. That's love, baby. Sometimes it makes us do the wrong things for the right reasons. She squeezed Thessaly's hand gently. But you need to know something. My pride in you has nothing to do with graduation. I'm proud of you because of who you are, because you're kind and brilliant and strong, because you face hard things with courage, because you kept going to class and finishing assignments while poison was flowing through your veins. That's what makes me proud, not the diploma. You. Those words broke something open in Thessaly. She cried the kind of tears that come from relief, from finally being fully seen and still being loved. Marlowe moved around the table to hold her, and they sat like that for a long time, mother and daughter letting the truth settle between them. When Thessaly finally pulled back, she looked at Marlowe with red-rimmed eyes. I want you at graduation, she said. I want you in the front row where I can see you. I want to walk across that stage knowing you're there. I don't care what I look like or how sick I feel. I want you there. Marlowe smiled through her own tears. I wouldn't be anywhere else. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning for graduation day. Marlowe insisted on buying Thessaly a new dress, something beautiful that would make her feel special despite everything else happening. They went shopping at a boutique near campus that specialized in modest, elegant clothing. Thessaly tried on several dresses before finding a burgundy one with long sleeves and a flowing skirt that hid how thin she'd become. When she looked at herself in the mirror, wearing the dress and her favorite headscarf in a matching color, she almost looked like herself again. Marlowe stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. You're beautiful, she said, and she meant it with her whole heart. Not because of the dress or the makeup or anything external, but because her daughter was alive and fighting and about to achieve something remarkable. That evening, Yvette drove down from their hometown to be there for graduation. She arrived with food, flowers, and the kind of maternal energy that Marlowe desperately needed. The three women, Marlowe, Thessaly, and Yvette, had dinner together in the small apartment, laughing and telling stories, creating memories that felt precious because they knew how fragile life could be. Yvette told embarrassing stories about Marlowe from nursing school, making Thessaly laugh until her sides hurt. Marlowe pretended to be annoyed, but loved seeing her daughter laugh like that, loved seeing her be young and carefree for even a moment. As the evening wore on, Yvette took Marlowe aside. "You're doing an incredible job," she said softly. "Opal would be so proud of both of you." Marlowe nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. She hoped that was true. She hoped her mother was watching from somewhere, seeing them fight this battle together. Graduation morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect May day that Atlanta was famous for. Marlowe woke before sunrise, too excited and nervous to sleep. She made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up, thinking about all the mornings like this she'd experienced as a mother. The morning Thessaly was born, her first day of kindergarten, her high school graduation. Each milestone had felt monumental, but this one carried extra weight. This wasn't just about education or achievement. This was about survival, about defiance, about a young woman who'd fought cancer and college simultaneously and refused to let either one defeat her. Marlowe felt her mother's presence strongly in those quiet moments before dawn. "We did it, Mama. Your grandbaby is graduating today." At the apartment, Thessaly was also awake early, dealing with morning nausea that had become routine. Bellamy helped her get ready, gently securing her headscarf and helping with makeup that would hide the worst of the treatment's effects. The burgundy dress fit perfectly, and despite everything, Thessaly looked radiant. There was something in her eyes, a light that suffering had managed to extinguish. Marlowe arrived at 8 to help with final preparations. When she saw Thessaly fully dressed, she had to take a moment to compose herself. This was her baby, her miracle, her reason for everything. "You look absolutely perfect," Marlowe said, her voice thick with emotion. Thessaly smiled, and in that smile, Marlowe saw the little girl who used to twirl in princess dresses and the strong woman she'd become, both versions existing in the same moment. The graduation ceremony was held in the campus auditorium, a beautiful space filled with families and graduates. Marlowe sat in the third row with Yvette and Bellamy, clutching the program so tightly her knuckles turned white. The auditorium filled with the sound of excited voices, proud relatives, cameras clicking, babies crying. It was beautiful chaos, the sound of community and celebration. When the graduates began to file in wearing their caps and gowns, Marlowe's eyes immediately found Thessaly. She walked with her head high despite the exhaustion that Marlowe knew she must be feeling. She took her seat among her classmates, and from where Marlowe sat, she could see Thessaly scanning the crowd until their eyes met. The smile that crossed her daughter's face made everything, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of fear worth it. The ceremony proceeded with speeches about hope and future and the power of education. The president of Spelman talked about the legacy of strong Black women who'd graduated from these halls and gone on to change the world. Marlowe listened with half her attention, the other half focused entirely on Thessaly. She watched her daughter applaud for her classmates, watched her laugh at jokes in the speeches, watched her participate fully in this moment, despite everything happening in her body. When they finally began calling names for diploma distribution, Marlowe's heart started racing. She pulled out her phone, ready to record, her hands shaking with anticipation. Bellamy held her other hand tightly, both of them waiting for Thessaly's name. Thessaly Janae Walker. The sound of her daughter's name echoing through that auditorium made Marlowe's breath catch. Thessaly stood with grace and walked across that stage. Each step was deliberate, powerful, a declaration that cancer had not won. As she accepted her diploma and shook hands with the college president, the entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath with Marlowe. Then Thessaly turned toward the audience, raised her diploma high in both hands, and the place erupted in applause. But Marlowe heard none of it. She was crying too hard, overwhelmed by pride and relief and joy, so intense it felt like her chest might explode. Yvette was crying beside her. Bellamy was crying. Strangers nearby who didn't even know their story were wiping their eyes because the emotion was contagious. This was victory. Not over cancer, that fight continued, but over fear, over isolation, over all the forces that tried to steal this moment. Thessaly had won her diploma, and Marlowe had been there to witness it. After the ceremony ended, the campus filled with graduates and families taking photos, celebrating, making memories. Marlowe pushed through the crowd to find Thessaly, and when they finally reached each other, they held on like they were the only two people in the world. "I'm so proud of you," Marlowe whispered into her daughter's ear. "More proud than I've ever been of anything in my entire life." Thessaly was crying again, but these were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away some of the pain from the past few months. They stood like that in the middle of the chaos, mother and daughter, connected by love and battle and an unbreakable bond. Around them, life continued, other families celebrating, other stories unfolding, but in their embrace was their whole world. Yvette and Bellamy joined them, and the four women took dozens of photos together. Thessaly with her diploma, Thessaly with her mother, the whole group with arms around each other, smiling like tomorrow was guaranteed, even though they all knew it wasn't. Other graduates stopped to congratulate Thessaly, friends who knew what she'd been through, professors who'd worked with her, classmates who'd witnessed her strength. Each interaction added to the fullness of the day, building something beautiful out of something that could have been tragic. Marlowe watched her daughter interact with her community and felt grateful for every person who'd supported her when Marlowe couldn't be there. It took a village not just to raise a child, but to save one too. Later, they went to dinner at a nice restaurant in downtown Atlanta, a celebration meal that Thessaly barely ate but appreciated anyway. The conversation flowed easily, mixing laughter with serious moments, joy with acknowledgement of the ongoing battle. Yvette proposed a toast, to Thessaly, the strongest woman I know, besides her mother. They clinked glasses, sweet tea for Thessaly, wine for the others, and drank to survival and strength and the power of love. As the evening wore on, Marlowe noticed Thessaly starting to fade, exhaustion catching up with her. They paid the bill and headed back to the apartment, driving through Atlanta's streets lit up with evening lights, the city alive with possibility. Back at the apartment, Marlowe helped Thessaly out of her graduation dress and into comfortable pajamas. The intimacy of these moments, helping her daughter undress, making sure she was comfortable, bringing her medication and water, felt sacred somehow. This was motherhood stripped down to its essence. Just care, just presence, just love in its most basic form. Thessaly took her medications and settled into bed, the diploma propped against the wall where she could see it. "Thank you," she said to Marlowe, "for coming, for being here, for everything." Marlowe smoothed the blankets around her daughter, tucking her in like she used to when Thessaly was small. "There's nowhere else I'd ever be," she said. It was the simple truth. Wherever Thessaly was, Marlowe would be too. That's what mothers did. They showed up, they stayed, they loved through the impossible parts. That night,
After Thessaly had fallen asleep, Marlowe sat by the window looking out at the city. She thought about the phone call that had started all of this, the hurt and confusion she'd felt when Thessaly asked her not to come to graduation. Now she understood completely. Thessaly had been trying to protect her from pain, trying to preserve some version of normalcy for just a little longer. It had been misguided, but came from love, and in the end, it had forced them to have conversations they might have avoided otherwise. It had brought them closer instead of pushing them apart. Sometimes, the worst moments created the strongest bonds. Sometimes, pain was the fire that forged unbreakable connections. Marlowe knew they still had a long road ahead. More treatments, more uncertainty, more fear. But they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. 2 months after graduation, Thessaly's treatment reached its most difficult phase. The chemotherapy had taken everything from her: her hair, her weight, her energy, her sense of normalcy. But the scan showed what they needed to see. The tumor was shrinking. Dr. Okoye presented them with the next step: surgery to remove what remained of the cancer, followed by radiation therapy. It was good news wrapped in terrifying reality. Surgery meant risks. It meant recovery. It meant facing the physical proof of what this disease had done to Thessaly's body. Marlowe sat beside her daughter in the oncologist's office, holding her hand while they discussed dates and procedures and all the clinical details that couldn't capture the emotional weight of what was coming. Marlowe had extended her leave from work, burning through savings she'd carefully built over years. Money didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except being here for every moment of Thessaly's fight. They'd fallen into routines that felt both foreign and natural: morning medications, afternoon naps, evening walks when Thessaly felt strong enough, phone calls with Katora, who'd become their long-distance cheerleader, calling several times a week to check in and offer encouragement. Yvette visited every other weekend, bringing normalcy and laughter and reminders that life existed beyond cancer and treatment. These women formed a circle of strength around Thessaly, each one holding her up when she couldn't stand on her own. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in late July. Marlowe barely slept the night before, her mind racing through every possible outcome. She prayed more than she had in years, bargaining with God in the darkness. Take anything from me, but let her live. Let her be okay, please. When morning came, they drove to the hospital in silence, both of them too scared to speak their fears out loud. In the pre-op area, Thessaly looked impossibly young in her hospital gown, her head bare without the scarves she usually wore. Marlowe held both of her hands and looked directly into her eyes. "You are going to get through this," she said with absolute conviction. "You're going to wake up, and I'm going to be right there, and we're going to keep fighting together. Do you believe me?" Thessaly nodded, tears sliding down her temples. "I believe you, Mama." The surgery lasted 6 hours. Marlowe spent every minute in the waiting room pacing and praying and drinking terrible coffee from the vending machine. Yvette had driven down to sit with her, and Bellamy came during her summer internship. The three of them created a small fortress of support, waiting together for news. When Dr. Okoye finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, Marlowe's heart nearly stopped. But the doctor was smiling. "The surgery went well," she said. "We removed all visible cancer. The tissue will go to pathology, but I'm cautiously optimistic. She did beautifully." Marlowe's knees buckled with relief. Yvette caught her, held her up,
let her cry tears that contained months of accumulated fear finally releasing. They let Marlowe into recovery first. Thessaly was still groggy from anesthesia, her eyes struggling to focus, but when she saw her mother, she smiled. "Hey, Mama," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "We did it." Marlowe pressed her forehead gently against Thessaly's, careful not to disturb any of the tubes and wires. "You did it, baby. You're so strong, so incredibly strong." Thessaly's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling her back towards sleep. But before she went under, she squeezed Marlowe's hand 3 times. Their signal, the code they developed when Thessaly was little. 3 squeezes meant, "I love you." Marlowe squeezed back 3 times, her own message clear. "I love you too, more than life itself, more than anything in this world. And I'm never letting you face anything alone again." 6 months after surgery, Thessaly sat in Dr. Okoye's office waiting for the results of her latest scan. Marlowe sat beside her, their hands clasped together on the armrests between their chairs. They'd been through this waiting game before. The anxiety, the hope, the fear that twisted in your stomach while you waited for someone to tell you whether you got to live or not. But today felt somehow different. Thessaly had completed all her radiation treatments. Her hair was growing back in tight curls that framed her face. She'd gained back 15 pounds. The color had returned to her cheeks. She looked alive again in a way she hadn't for almost a year. Still, they held their breath as Dr. Okoye walked in with the results folder. The doctor sat down and opened the file, her expression carefully neutral in that way medical professionals had perfected. Then she looked up at them both and smiled. "The scans are clear," she said. "No evidence of disease. You're in remission, Thessaly." The words hung in the air for a moment, almost too big to comprehend. Then Thessaly turned to Marlowe, and they both started crying and laughing at the same time, holding each other in that medical office while relief and joy washed over them in waves. Remission. Not cured, Dr. Okoye was careful to explain they'd need regular monitoring for years, that cancer could return, that vigilance was still necessary. But for now, in this moment, Thessaly was cancer-free. She'd won this battle. They'd won it together. Marlowe had moved back home 2 months earlier, returning to her job at the hospital, but with a completely different perspective on life. She'd learned that careers could wait, but moments with the people you loved couldn't. She'd learned that sacrifice looked different than she'd thought. Sometimes it meant letting go of control and letting others help carry the weight. She'd learned that strength wasn't about suffering alone, but about having the courage to be vulnerable. These lessons had changed her in fundamental ways. She was softer now, more present, less afraid of losing everything because she'd already faced that fear and survived it. Work was just work, but Thessaly was everything, and nothing would ever make Marlowe forget that priority again. Thessaly had decided to take a gap year before pursuing graduate school. She'd been accepted to several programs, but wanted time to heal, to travel, to figure out who she was beyond being a patient or a student. She'd started a blog about her cancer journey that had gained surprising traction, connecting her with other young adults facing similar battles. Writing about her experience had become therapeutic, a way of processing trauma while potentially helping others. She talked about the fear and the pain, but also about the unexpected gifts cancer had given her, clarity about what mattered, deeper relationships, appreciation for ordinary moments she used to take for granted. Marlowe read every post, marveling at her daughter's wisdom and resilience. They planned a trip together for the 1-year anniversary of Thessaly's diagnosis, a week in the mountains where they could rest and reflect and celebrate survival. Marlowe rented a cabin with a view of endless trees and sky, a place where they could breathe without hospitals and appointments and medical terminology. On the first evening there, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. "I've been thinking about that phone call," Thessaly said suddenly. "When I told you not to come to graduation, I was so wrong about that, Mom, about trying to protect you from hard things. The best gift you ever gave me wasn't making life easy. It was showing me how to face hard things with courage. That's what got me through cancer. Watching you fight your whole life taught me how to fight for mine." Marlowe felt emotion rise in her throat, but forced herself to speak through it. She said, "You taught me things too. You taught me that I couldn't control everything, no matter how hard I tried. You taught me that sometimes the people we love need to carry their own burdens, even when we desperately want to carry those burdens for them. You taught me what real strength looks like, not the performance of being okay, but the honesty of admitting when you're not." They sat in comfortable silence after that, mother and daughter, watching day turn to night. Above them, stars began to appear one by one, tiny points of light in the darkness, each one a promise, each one a reason to hope. The story of Marlowe and Thessaly didn't end with remission. It continued forward into uncertain future, into regular checkups and lingering fears and the knowledge that cancer could return. But it also continued into joy and possibility and the deep peace that comes from facing your worst nightmare and surviving it. Marlowe went back to work with renewed purpose, treating every patient like someone's beloved daughter, someone's reason for living. Thessaly pursued her dreams with the urgency of someone who knew how precious time really was. They talked on the phone every day, visited each other often, and never again kept painful secrets out of misguided attempts at protection. They'd learned that love meant being present for the hard parts, not just the celebrations. And they carried that lesson forward into every relationship, every challenge, every moment of their beautifully complicated lives. The phone call that had broken Marlowe's heart had ultimately healed something deeper between them. Sometimes the worst moments cracked you open just enough to let more light in. Sometimes pain was the doorway to deeper love. And sometimes a mother and daughter had to almost lose each other to fully understand how much they'd always had.